and welcome back to ADK Talks. I'm Jane, and I'm here with my co-host and brother Steve. Say hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve.
And as always, we're your guides to discovering the best of New York State's 6 million acre Adirondack Park. Last summer, we spoke with Adirondack Architectural Heritage, or ARRCH, about saving Great Camp Santanoni, preserving fire towers, and the fascinating tension between forever wild and historic preservation. Today, we're taking that conversation one step further, because maybe you've tried to grab a ticket for one of ARRCH's enormously popular tours, only to find out it's already sold out. Or maybe you own an older home or historic building, and you're staring at a sagging porch or a mystery crack in the foundation, and you're not sure how to go about fixing that and maintaining the authenticity, I guess, or the integrity of the original structure. Or maybe you just want to understand the stories hiding in plain sight across the Adirondacks. Joining us today are two people whose work makes that possible. Nolan, ARRCH's Educational Programs Director, who leads the organization's tours, workshops, and public programs across the region. Joining Nolan is Christine Bush, ARRCH's Preservation Services Director, who works with property owners and communities offering real, practical guidance on how to preserve historic buildings. I like to think of it as one person brings you through the door, the other helps you keep the place standing. So if you love the Adirondacks and want to see them with sharper eyes, this episode is for you. Nolan and Christine, welcome back to ADK Talks.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Nolan. In 60 seconds or a couple minutes more, a couple minutes less, refresh our audience's memory about what ARRCH does and why does it matter specifically in the Adirondacks?
Sure, thanks, Jane. So ARRCH, or Adirondack Architectural Heritage, as Jane mentioned, is the nonprofit historic preservation organization for the entire Adirondack region. So our service area covers all 12 counties that are connected to the Adirondack Park, as well as Jefferson County, which is sometimes left out. We cover them too. But we help people save, recognize, and cherish the places that really make our region special and that matter to them. And ARRCH's work matters because we would argue that our historic resources here, the Adirondacks, and infrastructure as well, are just as important as nature. So that's a bit about why ARRCH matters.
Christine, when someone calls ARRCH looking for help, what kinds of problems are they usually facing?
People call about all sorts of concerns and problems. Often they may just be interested in learning a little bit more about the history of their house or how to date or identify what style their building is. We get a lot of homeowners who need help getting started and sort of understanding what the problems are and how they should approach it. And we get a lot of questions concerning, improving energy efficiency, moisture problems, and I get quite a few calls, people wondering what color they should paint their house, which is always an interesting one to kind of talk about. And of course, I'm always frequently asked about funding and can they recommend contractors. And I always like to talk about the tax credit programs and the National Register, state and National Register, and kind of some of those things and connecting people with the resources that they need to kind of get started on their projects.
I first became familiar with ARRCH because of the amazing tours you guys offer. When people are on the tours and they vary, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, what sort of architectural details or facets do you hope that people start noticing in their own towns?
Well, if you've ever been on an ARRCH tour, you know that it's not just about singular architectural elements or a specific building, but more about connecting people to the history and the stories and their community. And what I hope that people, when they go on these tours that, Nolan puts together these amazing programs, is that they're able to recognize that simple vernacular farmhouse is just as important as that grand Second Empire mansion that they're looking at, that's all connected and it's all part of our story and our sort of history that we're sharing with our group and the wider audience.
As we're talking about these tours, Are these for anyone? Are these who's sort of your ideal audience, or is there not a specific target?
So really our tours and our programs in general are really for anyone who are curious about, or anybody that is curious about Adirondack places or Adirondack life, whether they have a presence in the region or not. So kind of what people should expect on these programs is to obviously learn about a lot about a place, but to also be able to experience that place firsthand. And we often visit a lot of places that are otherwise inaccessible to the public. So we get a lot of doors open in that way, and people tend to really gravitate toward those particular outings. And as for folks who might be surprised by these kinds of outings, people who live here both year-round and seasonally, who may have spent many years in one community, maybe is very surprised to learn more about neighboring communities that they haven't otherwise explored, or to be able to explore kind of new preservation projects in their own backyard. Because we like to say there's always new stories to explore in the region and ways to understand how even in these everyday places, not just notable landmarks, are really significant to the broader story of the region and the nation as well.
What kinds of programs are on the docket, or are you planning for 2026?
We're still in the kind of latter part of this planning stages of the next season in 2026, but we're getting the final pieces in place, and we don't want to spoil too much, but I can share, certainly share some new outings. One is, one that I can share is that we're exploring the Midnight Ride of Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh, great.
From Newcomb to North Creek, and the sort of 125th anniversary of that kind of ride to the presidency, so to speak. And, another I can share is, we're taking a tour of several historic camps on Upper Chattagay Lake, a place we've never been to before. So that's very exciting. And we can also share that not so much new outings, but we're lucky to have a lot of great partners and have some kind of classic outings to lean on. Like, for example, we take a trip to Racket Lake's Long Point every year, and we explore Camp Pine Knot, which is the kind of founding example of Adirondack rustic architecture in terms of great camps that we see in the region. And we also visit a private camp during that outing, and also St. William's on Long Point, a 1890 great shingle-style Catholic church, former Catholic church that's now operated by a nonprofit. It has great events, concerts, that sort of thing. So a lot of beautiful places like that. We toured to Valcour Island, where we give a guided hike, exploring the kind of layers of history. Significantly this year in our semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary, where there's a Revolutionary War battle off the bay of Valcour Island in October 1776. There's also a lighthouse there that we explore as part of that outing, and a 19th century utopian community that lasted for a year. So there's lots of stories that we explore, and kind of places new and old.
I love how many of your programs give people access to things that aren't normally accessible. And I think Valcour Island is a great example for listeners who might not be familiar with that. That's an island in the middle of Lake Champlain, and it is only accessible by boat. So you can go anytime you want, but you just have to have a boat to get there. You can kayak there, you can hike on the property, but one of the things your program does is help people actually physically get there. And the same with some of those historic places on Racket Lake too. So that's really cool. As I mentioned in your intro, though, is that these programs really do sell out fast. Lots of times, I'll see something and then I'll go back a couple days later to get tickets, and it's already sold out. What's the best strategy for somebody to secure a spot?
Sure. So they are immensely popular, and we like to say it's a good problem to have.
Sure.
And so the best way to access programs, we would say, is to become a member of Adirondack Architectural Heritage. And that's because members earn early registration through their membership to what we call a tour lottery. So our tours are so popular that we had to come up with a kind of democratic way to dole out some of these spots. And we have a tour lottery to do that. And members get priority access to that lottery. And, anyone can sign up. That being said, but members get that priority access. And we also do offer some first come, first served outings, and also our trades workshops, preservation trades workshops. Those are often first come, first serve, which I think Christine will talk about probably in one of her pieces. But Also, events at Great Camp Santanoni, those are often first come, first serve as the only publicly accessible great camp in the Adirondacks. We like to give access to those places as much as we can as well. And also we have an email list, which you could sign up for through our website, AARCH.org. That's right on our homepage. The summer newsletter, which has our tour schedule in it, will come out in mid-April. And that will go out on our email list and also being featured on our website and our social media channels as well. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested in attending.
That's awesome. And listener, I'd strongly urge you, as we do in every episode of ADK Talks, I think, definitely check out their website to learn more about what they do. And you can see information about some of their past tours and other interesting stuff. And as Nolan said, if you really want to increase your odds, improve your odds of getting a spot on one of those tours, join and become a member and support them.
And I will say too, Jane, that's a very compassionate lottery system too. So.
Great. Awesome. Christine, can you walk us through what happens when someone reaches out for technical assistance? Or do you have any thoughts on kind of the information they should be ready to share? Or how does that usually work?
We cover such a large geographic area that, it can be challenging for me to kind of do site visits all over the place. And so I always like to start with a phone call or an email. That's typically where these things generate from. Or if Nolan happens to be doing a program and notices something, he might refer them to me. So I typically start with a phone call, and I'll ask for general information and some photographs and kind of have a conversation with the owner to see where they're at and what sort of issues or questions that they might have. And then from there, I will help them as best as I can and then schedule an appointment for a site visit if needed. And that's really is particularly for specific house building, issues. Really, there's no substitute for kind of being on site and really taking a look at it, because oftentimes, that crack in the foundation is really a result of either poor footings or drainage issues or other things. So they're more complex than just a photograph might tell you. I love to poke around and, if somebody actually doing some investigation in attics and basements, and sometimes it might involve, my handy crowbar and a hammer and doing a little deeper investigation. But I always try to come back to the office and be able to put together some sort of a document or some guidance so that they know where to start from, or refer them, like if they need an engineer or an architect, if they really need some other professionals that are specific to their building. And so that they have some tools to work with going forward. And also, I will add that if they need some ongoing assistance, ARRCH does offer some additional services like existing conditions documentations and some drawings and even some specifications. Those tend to be a, for fee kind of charges when you start getting into more in-depth kind of services. But we certainly do offer that ongoing. And also, too, one of the perks of membership of ARRCH is that we will do site inspections. And even if you just want to have some help figuring out what style is my building, or doing a little research onto, who lived there, or how it fits into the community.
That's awesome.
That's kind of what we do.
Yeah, and Nolan, I'm not sure if we mentioned this when we talked about your programming, but you guys have also done some hands-on workshops for people to attend. What sort of workshops are popular, or what do they look like?
So we often have fewer participants on those workshops since they're more hands-on and they kind of involve a lot more person-to-person, more person-to-person level of things. But because of that, they're very meaningful to the people who take them, and they tend to be new homeowners and younger folks who might be interested in getting DIY experience, or even just learning about what questions to ask, as Christine mentioned, kind of what to look for, what the best practices are when you have a historic home or building that you're dealing with. So a favorite of ours to host it's a classic, is restoring wood windows. And so wood windows are really important character defining features to many old buildings, and many old buildings still have them, fortunately. They're infinitely repairable and can last a really long time when they're well maintained. And the wooden materials that were used for those windows are so good back when they were made. They'll last for a very long time. And so that's one of the workshops that we offer. A couple others that we do are looking at traditional lime plaster. We've done that a few times. Kind of a plumbing 101. We've done a power tools for women workshop, kind of trying to destigmatize power tools in that way. And so we run the gamut for a lot of our hands-on work too. So, and this year we're doing one on masonry repointing, as well as kind of looking at decorative arts and stained glass and
woodworking.
Woodworking, yes, and introductory woodworking.
We are doing a wood window restoration workshop as well.
Yes,
That's awesome. That's awesome. Christine, do you sometimes see, or is there a frequent mistake people sometimes make when they're trying to restore or preserve their building or home? What sorts of lessons learned from the past can you share with our listeners?
I think that one of the biggest sort of, I don't want to say problems, but kind of issues that people are often don't know where to start, and they often feel overwhelmed. And sometimes they'll just sort of jump in without a plan because they just don't know where to begin. And so what I always tell people, and anyone who's worked on an old building knows, that you can potentially open up a can of worms. So you want to at least start with a good plan and some realistic expectations, so that when those things unexpected come up, you have a framework to work from. You know what your budget is, you know what your timeline is. You might have having a good sense of what you can do yourself. And I often tell people, never underestimate your own abilities and what you can need to hire a professional for. And I think a lot of those things can be achieved in doing full assessments and maybe getting the help of someone like ARRCH or another, a contractor who specializes in these kind of things, and really coming up with a full assessment of your building and having a plan and setting aside that budget and really having those kind of realistic expectations. And then that being said, Adirondacks, I've seen some pretty creative solutions to problems where you don't have a big budget and you can't hire professionals that really do the job. And I think, I always tell people, just don't be deterred, be positive about it, and really have fun with it. Restoration and renovation, while it does have its it's moments where you just want to run away, ultimately it's a great satisfaction, and you're preserving that history. And if you love a building, it'll love you back, and to really just kind of stay with it. And the result of most of the problems is really deferred maintenance. And that's usually, I tell people, that's the biggest thing. Once you do all of these projects, or you inherit a building in some way, have a maintenance plan so that you're evaluating, you're looking at your building, and so that small problems don't become big problems.
That's something, even with a not historic building, that's really important. That, something that you think is just a little leak can sometimes be a really bigger issue. We've certainly learned that at our non-historic, pretty good camp, not great camp here in the Adirondacks as well. Talking again about the programs and the tours, Nolan, can you think of a particular event or tour that you all hosted that really had an impact on the people who attended, or really you saw people sort of like the light bulb go on, or people kind of had an aha moment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jane. It's also a very tough question. Since there's really a spectrum of experiences where people have different takeaways in our programs. For example, on one of our outings, exploring the work of William Coulter, who was one of perhaps the earliest resident architects who lived and was established in the region. The group visits Eagle Island, which is one of Coulter's designed camps, and It was turned into a girls' camp at one point after being a private camp, and it's a children's camp today, and it's a great place where young people can still connect to Adirondack nature. And then also part of that outing, we traveled to a nearby Coulter Design camp that was a private camp that was up against demolition, and the current owners were sort of selected as the buyers because they were willing to save the building. So that really resonated with people who attended that tour. Really gave them a sense of a kind of hopeful, seeing historic preservation in action, kind of working. Another example is we explore a lot of we do a series of small farms tours where we explore farming and farmsteads in a way that connects people more closely to local food and to each other as well. That kind of dynamism was really exemplified in an outing we called Conversing with the Landscape. That took place in an old 19th century farmstead that's now home to what's called Sand River Community Farm. This is a place that offers food from the farm as a gift to anyone who's hungry for any reason. And our outing there was about learning the history of the farm too, but it's about more deeply connecting with neighboring and getting to know each other through shared conversation, local food, eating, and some light labor on the farm too. So it was really experiential in a lot of ways. So people kind of get it on a range of levels, depending on the experience.
I'd also want to point out too that it's not just old historic buildings that you guys explore or sites. There are some 20th century places you went to. Like one of the things we talked about with Aaron last year were the missile silos that are up near Plattsburgh. Are there other really unusual places you can point to or that you've visited?
Oh, there's plenty. I'd have to think about that. Yeah, I'd say one really unique one is called Leary Castle. It's in Tupper Lake. It's the current homeowner is also an architect, and this is a project that started in the 60s with this really whimsical kind of designer contractor, and the current resident, who is an architect, finished it. But it's a sort of medieval-inspired castle in the middle of Tupper Lake that stretches out above the trees, and that's a really whimsical place. And then in terms of, I'd say the missile silos are definitely a unique experience. Going into a 1960s nuclear missile silo is unlike anything you'll ever experience. It's essentially a big piece of infrastructure that's a very large weapon embedded in the ground. So that's floating on these pneumatic tubes. So a totally bizarre experience.
I would imagine that's not something people typically associate with the Adirondacks, but it was a big deal during the Cold War.
Yeah, I think in that way too. Just to kind of piggyback off that, Jane. We often get maybe shoehorned into people understanding the Adirondacks as kind of just great camps in terms of architecture, but there's really so much other stuff. There's Greek Revival kind of or Federal style farmhouses that make up a bigger part of our story. There's Queen Anne style, kind of high style homes that are right in hamlets and communities across the Adirondacks. So those places really make up the story too, and we don't want to forget about those. There's historic churches, there's children's camps. They're all a big part of this larger story that we try to access through our programming.
Yeah. Stephen and I are also big fans of, and you can chime in on this, Steve, some of the mid-century modern buildings, especially the motels, back when people got in their car to take a vacation. And we had the previous owners of Northwood Cabins that just recently changed hands, who I think won one of your preservation awards because they have this gorgeous neon sign that they restored. That's really cool. That's in Tupper Lake too. Christine, is there a specific preservation project you all were involved in or involved with that meant more than just saving a building?
Yes, I think a project that really stands out to me is the Graves Mansion in Ausable Forks. And I'm sure many of your listeners might be familiar with the Graves Mansion. It's this grand Second Empire, very quirky, sort of iconic structure in the heart of Ausable Forks that is always just been revered and cherished. However, nobody's really been able to take on. It's such a huge project and daunting that it's one of those things that everybody just kind of drives by and says, oh, I wish somebody would do something. If I only had the money or the bandwidth to take something like this on. And fortunately for the building, Melinda Levins from Texas about 5 years ago purchased it and is just full of passion and enthusiasm. And really one of the first things she did was to reach out to ARRCH and say, I just stepped off the plane from Texas and I've seen this building for the first time and realized that I've got quite a project on my hands. And so we kind of worked with her initially. We wound up writing a National Register nomination with her. And then we went on to partner with her to host our historic plaster workshops. And we've done 3 of those. And it's just been really great to see how homeowners, people who have taken those workshops, have gone on to then go to their homes and restore plaster. And then they've also been really advocates and spokesperson for how great lime plaster is and are speaking to their contractors and, having parties where people talk about lime plaster and get really excited about preservation. We've had the folks at Cheap Old Houses from that program actually did a kind of a book tour, meet and greet, and tour of the Graves Mansion. And also additionally, that kind of got the whole community really excited about the building and preservation and kind of talking to the supervisor and town leaders about then going ahead, and ARRCH did a National Register nomination for the hamlet of All Sable Forks. So now you've kind of really got it spread through the community. And kind of what's really just wonderful about that project is that, the work that she's doing and we're doing with them is having this impact. It's rippling throughout, but we've created these wonderful partnerships and friendships that are just sort of evergreen or just keep going on. And, Melinda, the owner, is just really a poster child for really just having that passion and unwavering kind of determination and positive attitude to kind of restore this gem that she's kind of a real inspiration to us. And, she's made everyone in the community kind of part of this process. And it's really enabled to have a conversation about preservation and our built legacy and how we all can kind of do our part. And so it's just been a real joy, and we just can't wait to see what she does next.
And also, Christine, do you want to add the nomination for the Forks?
Yeah, well, so we did do the hamlet of, All Sable Forks. We do the National Register district for that just got listed in 2025. So those residents within the district will be able to take advantage of the state and federal tax credit programs.
People are, I know myself personally, there are certain buildings or certain places that people get very emotionally attached to. And when somebody decides to, revive or restore buildings, there can sometimes be tension between people's emotional associations with a building and what then people are also doing to those buildings, especially if what they're doing is not that nice. Is that something that you guys have to confront with or deal with sometimes?
Well, I would say yes, on a very regular basis.
Okay.
The biggest thing is tearing out my windows.
Right.
That's, kind of something that we always try to talk to people about the value in those old wood windows, how they can be repaired, and that modern windows in 10 years will probably fail and you'll have to replace them again, that they're really not the investment that you think they are. And so that's kind of one of the things that probably the biggest thing that we like to have conversations with people to try to stop that. Vinyl siding's also another big one that people think that's going to be a great solution to maintenance when it's really just trapping moisture and creating a much larger problem. So But ultimately, we can only have the conversation and make suggestions and offer them guidance and information and hope for the best.
Right, right. Nolan, you've mentioned a couple of places that are always open to the public, like Great Camp Santinoni and other places. Does ARRCH offer any, I don't know, self-guided tours or virtual options for people that maybe can't make a specific date or be there in person?
Sure. In a way, yes. We published a few years ago our Guide to Adirondack Architecture by Richard Longstreth. And that's written to really be a guidebook for folks who are walking or driving through Adirondack communities. And it offers blurbs and architectural historical information on those places that are kind of on public right-of-ways. But there's been some past examples of walking tours, walking guides that we've created for the Champlain Valley that are available on our website. Cover architecture fairly well. But beyond that, I don't know that there's any. This is a sort of a plug for our programs, but there's really no substitute for getting out to the places and exploring them.
Oh yeah.
Whether you do it by yourself or not, or with ARRCH, there's always something to see and learn by getting to a place and kind of spending some time there. So in a lot of ways, our programs do kind of deep dives in communities sometimes where we, a lot of people have said, I'll ask in the beginning of the day, who has driven through here versus who has stopped. And all the hands shoot up for people who have driven through there, but very few of them have actually stopped. So being able to explore those communities more in depth gives us a kind of new understanding of those places as we, drive or walk through them.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of, going on a tour or working with a guide, no matter where you are. Probably 10 years ago, I was in Italy and we went to Pompeii, and friends of ours insisted, you have to have a guide. And I at that point in time, I wasn't really a guide person. We never could have appreciated what those ruins are or what was there without having somebody point that out to us. And then, recently, speaking of places up in Essex County, we went to the Star Trek Original Series set tour. I don't know if you've ever been there. But they don't allow you to go and walk around for a lot of reasons. You have to go on the tour. And I'm not a Trekkie. So having that guide be able to explain everything and, how the sets were made and all of that stuff is really important. So that's my plug for why tours and guides are really important. One thing I just discovered that you guys have online is the Adirondack Atlas. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That's not something we host ourselves, but the Adirondack Atlas is kind of a digital asset that you can use. Has different layers that explain the Adirondack region in a couple different ways. There's lists for institutions and organizations, and we embedded a layer in that atlas that's based off of Richard Longstreth's book that I just mentioned that lists architecture by community. So you can have a layer where you're looking at historic places and it gives those descriptions in a little image, as you kind of go across the map. So it's really helpful in that way.
I kind of went down a rabbit hole on it the other day. It's a really cool tool. Where can people get that book?
You can order that from ARRCH's website or give us a call. Yep. We make that available, and members also get a 20% discount on our books as well. We also have some other works on Adirondack churches. We have a book on White Pine Camp up in Franklin County. People are interested in that. So,
what did they call that? The Eastern White House or something?
The Summer White House for Calvin Coolidge.
That's right. Oh, that's so cool. Christine, in your area, are there certain things that are coming out in 2026 that we should be aware of?
Yes, we're very excited. We're going to be launching the Adirondack Architectural Salvage. We're going to be taking salvage building materials. Hopefully, this is a great way to keep things out of the landfill, as well as repurposing, helping people that are doing some restoration projects, as well as being able to offer some materials at reduced cost to our community. So we'll be taking everything from brackets to beams and sort of everything that's in between, light fixtures, doors, windows, vintage stuff. But we'll also be taking, if you do have, leftover insulation or tiles from a building project that could be repurposed. Though all those things would be great. We'll keep them out of the landfill. We'll be able to recirculate them. We're very fortunate that we've gotten some funding. In fact, we just received a grant from DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, Smart Growth Community Grant. And we have a great location at the Old Praise Farm Stand people might be familiar with, right off of Exit 34, about a mile from our office. And we're in the process right now of kind of getting the building, getting some plumbing and getting a few roof repairs. We're going to be this is going to be mostly volunteer run. So we'll be looking for volunteers from all sorts of things, from retail to helping to pick up to salvage materials, working in the warehouse, doing all sorts of things. It's going to be a wonderful, great, fun sort of thing. And if you have materials to donate, everything's sort of getting launched, so we don't have official website kind of launched, but are taking volunteer applications, are taking donations of materials. You can reach me here or email at salvage@arch.org if you've got materials or you want to learn more about it. And we're hoping to launch, have at least a soft opening mid-May. So we're very excited. So stay tuned to ARRCH, and please feel free to contact me here if you have any sort of questions.
So another piece of virtual content that we offer are webinars that are the kind of first come, first serve. We host those maybe twice a year, covering topics from historic preservation funding opportunities to more content-based stuff like historic shipwrecks or fire towers, and also the work of partner organizations and some of our advocacy work as well. And those are all available for free on our YouTube page, so you can check those out. We also, on our YouTube page, feature some of the historic trades workshops that we mentioned earlier. Some of those were recorded, and we edited those and uploaded them to our YouTube page, so people can use those as a resource if they're doing DIY projects, or you can just look for the more content-based stuff if you're just interested in some of those topics.
That's awesome. That's so great.
Thanks.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the programs when they come out, and I better renew my membership so I can get into the ones that I want to get into. But thank you so much for spending time with us today. Before we let you loose out in the wild, we like to wrap up each episode asking our guests to share. We've already shared so many cool gems and interesting places in the Adirondacks, but tell us about one of your favorite places in the Adirondacks. And it can be anything. It doesn't have to be a building. It could be, a ice cream stand or a golf course or a paddle. Really anything. It's up to you. So Nolan, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. That's a very tough question. We, like you said, Jane, we see hidden gems all the time on our tours. So I would encourage folks to take some ARRCH tours. I can't possibly choose. I can only say that those experiences are really lasting and memorable. I've been on a number of them, in a sort of liaison role. So they're just wonderful in that way. But I think Keysville, where our office is based, and the Ausable Valley in general, Keysville is a former mill town with some wonderful historic bridges and these great stone historic buildings. It's kind of this reclaimed industrial landscape that's really charming and kind of second to none in the region. We don't think it gets enough attention. So I'd say that's one of my hidden gems.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been by your offices and, been in Keysville. It's really a neat town. It's very cool. Okay, Christine, you're up next.
I guess I would say, as somebody who I just love bridges, and I also happen to love fly fishing. So I guess I would say there's some special stretches along the Ausable River that I would pick as my favorites. I can't pick just one.
And sometimes people don't like to tell us the exact location of places because they're like, I don't want to give away my special spot. So that I totally get that. The AuSable is beautiful.
Yeah, you can just say AuSable River. That's my
Yes.
Exactly.
It is a gem. The mighty AuSable. Yes.
Well, again, thanks so much for spending time with us today. We look forward to seeing the full slate of tours and programs when it comes out, and we appreciate all that you're doing to help preserve important places in the Adirondacks as well.
Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you for having us.
Well, Steve, that was, as always, very fascinating.
Yes, indeed. They have quite the little organization there. They do great work.
They're doing amazing things, and it really started with preserving Santanoni.
Yeah.
Back in, I think was that as far back as the 70s, or am I confusing it with Great Camp Sagamore? I think it's more recent than that.
I recall, I think when I was in college, there was a big discussion on whether they were going to burn Santanoni to return it to Forever Wild.
Yeah.
It was a pretty big debate, and I can remember reading about it and thinking what a waste of a beautiful, beautiful piece of property that would be. And, what they've done is amazing. They've kept it as close as Forever Wild as you possibly can be with having buildings on it. For all practical purposes, it is Forever Wild.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about it several times over the course of this great podcast that we were crazy enough to start. But it's a really great experience to go and visit that place. It's, you can only access it on, in the summer on foot or bike. There is a wagon. I don't know if it's horse-drawn or not, that you can take. You have to make arrangements for that in advance. But you can go anytime you want. Even in the winter, you can cross-country ski or snowshoe in as well. It's really a cool thing. And as Nolan explained, through their tours and programs, you get in to see some camps that you would never see otherwise. So, or buildings that you might ever be able to visit on your own. So that's a great thing. Well, listener, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of ADK Talks. I hope we opened your eyes a little further to some of the many historic and unique aspects of the Adirondacks. Preserving the Adirondacks isn't about freezing things in time. It's about making sure the stories, the craftsmanship, and communities endure. So a huge thanks to our guests, Nolan and Christine from Adirondack Architectural Heritage. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review ADK Talks. It truly makes a difference and helps more people to discover these voices and the region we love. And for more Adirondack stories and local insights, you can visit adktaste.com and subscribe to our newsletter.
And please send us your questions and comments to info@adktaste.com.
Yeah, we've been getting some really interesting questions lately. Just as a tangent, somebody wrote in and asked about, are there vegetarian and vegan options in the Adirondacks? And we'll answer that question actually on an upcoming podcast. But we wrote an article about it.
Yes, they are. We're
going to keep them hidden. There are hidden gems. We're not going to disclose them. No, you can actually read an article about it on our website right now.
Mark.
Exactly. All right. Until next time, listener, we hope that you keep exploring and keep noticing the many fascinating details of the Adirondack Park. Thanks and take care.
Bye-bye.